For more on this, I'm now joined by Mr. Sandile Swana, Independent Governance and Risk Management Specialist. Mr. Swana, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, as you are watching the testimony being given at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, what was going through your mind as you were hearing Themba Koti give testimony as Zugu Saranto were giving testimony?
Well, it's depressing. First of all, it's very, very disappointing. The fact of the matter, if you take Godi's testimony as an example, there's a government oversight model in Parliament today, parliamentary oversight model, which was written out, and the ANC and all the parties participated because they wanted to raise the standard of governance and oversight in South Africa. It was that they were excited and they adopted it. But every time that they had to implement the natural outcomes of that governance process, the ruling party, the African National Congress, stymied, stifled, and put to an end all efforts to fully implement the governance model.
And so where does this put opposition parties?
The opposition parties, and in this case, obviously there are a number of them, but we can talk first the DA, EFF, and UDM, who had learned that you can never get an ear, even no matter how much common sense you talk to the ruling party. So they had to resort to using the public protector, using the Constitutional Court and other courts, and using the ethics committees and things like that to try and bolster the fact that they do not have enough votes, because the ANC would use this overwhelming majority in Parliament, more than 60%, to actually drive through all the portfolio committees and Parliament itself decisions that were actually promoting poor governance and the breaking of various laws within South Africa, including the PFMA and the MFMA.
Now, we understand, Mr. Swana, that obviously the committees and Parliament and the committees specifically are the engine rooms. That's how they've been described, as engine rooms for accountability and oversight. The writing is now on the wall regarding the state of oversight within Parliament and the immense majority that the ruling party has in Parliament and the lack of authority that the opposition parties have due to their sheer lack of numbers. How is this then to be circumvented? How can Parliament be once again given its teeth without having to resort to, forming commissions of inquiry and other Chapter 9 institutions?
The Auditor General has repeatedly, the previous one, Thami Ngubeni, repeatedly told the voters that this matter is in their hands. For as long as they continue to give above 60% of the votes to the African National Congress, and the African National Congress doesn't have any single resolution to adopt and implement fully all the recommendations of the Auditor General without query, all the resolutions and recommendations and findings of all Chapter 9 institutions without query. For as long as the ANC has not done that, and it continues to get the votes, so the voters in South Africa are the ones who are putting us in this mess by continuing to support people who do not want to enforce good governance in South Africa. That is where the problem starts. The mind of the voter needs to change. In the absence of that, then the courts have to be used, other forms of civil disobedience and mobilization of communities outside of Parliament, accepting that the ANC probably has got another 10 years of majority in Parliament. That is my estimate.
How does one actually even prevent this from happening? Because by the time, civil action takes place, by the time other institutions are used, the billions are already gone.
The prevention of it one of the problems that senior politicians in this country have got to admit. When I talk senior politicians, I include the DA, the former National Party, the ANC, and so on. Because when corruption started, it was about funding the ANC, because the ANC came into this country with no money. So it became generally understood that they would use the procurement system to extract funds out of the national treasury, if you want, to fund themselves. And in the process of doing that, they started funding their own private lifestyles and so on and so on. For instance, in all of this discussion of Gupta, Bosasa, and so on, we have not yet heard how much of the Gupta money has gone to the African National Congress itself and to its programs, its election campaigns, and so on. How much of state capture financial in numbers, how much has actually gone to the African National Congress?
How then do
so
we...
that issue, if you don't resolve the funding of political parties, you don't resolve that issue, you are going to have a problem. The second problem that needs to be resolved is the issue of direct representation. Many of those people, for instance, who represents me, my area in parliament, who's my representative there, who takes my views to parliament directly and know that my area where I live, I'm being represented by that person. And if I have a query, I can challenge and I can mobilize my community to remove that person. Who is that? We don't know that because we don't have direct representation. So the electoral system and the system of representation needs to change.
Do you think that the Political Party Funding Act is going to go a long way in restructuring the way that political parties have traditionally been acquiring their financing? It obviously now, because we're focusing on the African National Congress, it means that it will be carte blanche as far as the source of funding is concerned.
Yes, it's a positive step in the right direction, absolutely welcome. And now we need diligence in the sense that we need to have a transparency and ways of knowing, and our banks know who gets which money. So the financial intelligence also need to be part of that transparency and disclosing that these monies have come into this party. The IEC or whatever mechanism is going to be used to actually disclose and make the public aware of these monies needs to be a continuous process. That will go a long way, but fundamentally the next campaign that needs to continue is direct representation. We cannot have people who represent parties that are then hijacked, claiming to be representing us, but actually they are representing parties that are led by people who are fattening their own purses, building large estates for themselves. That is where another problem lies. So we need direct representation. That is the next step that needs to happen.
Is South Africa and are South Africans ready for that direct representation? Do we have even the financial infrastructure to be able to support independent candidates?
The direct representation does not need independent candidates. In other words, the ANC can say, for instance, so-and-so represents Soweto. So within the ANC, then people know that this person, their full duties is here. And if that person needs to be recalled, that community can recall even those that didn't vote for that person. And so on, you need mechanism of that kind. So we're not saying there must be abolition of political parties. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that we need to be represented even within political parties. And the right of recall must actually rest with us as the communities.
Mr. Swana, thank you so much.
Not with the political parties.
Thank you so much once again
for
your insights. Very much appreciated. Mr. Sandile Swana, the Independent Governance and Risk Management Specialist.